From massive game-changing tips to small niche tips that you probably don't even know about, here are 32 things that you should never do as a killer in Dead by Daylight. The last 6 tips are the most crucial for helping you improve, so make sure you stick around for that. Number 1, you should never fall from a height without swinging towards the fall first. Obviously, when you swing, you get a small burst of speed, and then you get slowed down for a bit when you finish the swing. Well, if you're falling from a height, the slow doesn't affect you at all since you're just going down anyway, so you may as well get that slight burst of speed without the downside of slowing down afterward. On top of this, it's also way more efficient for changing directions midair. Purely walking off the edge keeps your momentum, making you lose precious seconds, whereas swinging off the ledge lets you control your momentum, which can make you much better in chase. Number 2, you should never change directions in chase while you're not touching a wall or an object, especially when trying to mind game at an unsafe pallet. Similar to what I just said about falling, momentum can be crucial to catching survivors by mere milliseconds. Let's say you're at an unsafe loop and are trying to mind game the survivor. If you change directions in chase, there is a noticeable deceleration as you slow down to go in the other direction. However, if you bump into a wall or an object while you change directions, for whatever reason it doesn't have any deceleration, so you're able to instantly change direction without being slowed. This will give survivors a lot less time to react to what you're doing. Number 3, you should never break the wrong breakable doors and pallets. Certain doors on certain maps can actually put you at a disadvantage by providing survivors with an additional way to loop. A good example of this is this door on Wretched Shop. If the window next to it is blocked, there's literally zero reason to ever break that door because it just gives survivors an extra way to get out of this corner. But if you keep that door up, then this area of the main building suddenly becomes a dead end. In regards to pallets, most unsafe pallets are very easy to play around as killer and are only useful to the survivors if they're able to stun you. By not breaking these pallets, it'll not only save you time because you aren't breaking them to begin with, but it'll also give survivors a false sense of security because it's a quote-unquote resource that they can use, which may lure them to it instead of going to a better loop nearby. And since they're unsafe pallets, it'll be super easy to down them here. Number 4, you should never carry a survivor to a hook without looking around. There have been so many times where I obtain crucial information just by looking around while I'm carrying someone to a hook. You'll sometimes catch survivors hiding or see scratch marks in the distance, which can all be super helpful for knowing where to go next. Keep in mind that your movement will be a bit hard to get used to because of the survivor wiggling, but you'll get it after a little bit of practice. Number 5, you should never turn a corner in chase without intentionally showing or hiding your red stain. Don't just go on autopilot when in a loop. If you're trying to mind game a survivor, make sure every single movement has intention behind it. If you're turning a corner, think about where the survivor could be. Are you going to show your red stain to make the survivor think you're committing to that direction but then double back? Or are you going to moonwalk to hide your red stain and hopefully catch the survivor off guard? Always be thinking about what the survivor is going to see and how that's going to affect how they play. Number 6, you should never ever ignore your HUD for crucial information. Many people don't realize the game-changing information you can get from literally just looking at your HUD. For example, if a survivor just got unhooked and then like 6 seconds later you see that they got healed, then you can infer that they were either healed by 2 teammates, which gives you the location of 3 out of the 4 survivors, or you can infer that the person who unhooked them has a medkit or healing perks, which is also useful information to know. Here's another great example. If there are 3 survivors alive and one of them is on the hook, another one is injured and you know that they have 2 hook states, and then the third one is healthy and you know that you've never hooked them, you can easily infer that the survivor with 0 hook states will be the one going for the save. The overall point is that you can get so much free information from the things on the HUD or even the lack of things on the HUD. This takes lots of game knowledge and experience to fully utilize, but don't dismiss it if you're trying to improve as killer. Number 7, you should never be toxic in endgame chat. There's literally zero reason to ever be toxic in the chat. Even if you feel frustrated and felt like the survivors were bullying you, don't give in to your frustration. Just say GG and move on. If you start being toxic in endgame chat, you'll only get more frustrated and it'll tilt you even more. Even if the survivors started it and instantly start shit talking you in chat, just say GG's guys, was a fun match and move on. They're just trying to get a reaction out of you, and if you let it get to you, you're just gonna play worse and worse. You can also mute the endgame chat by clicking on this button here, which completely hides it until you click it again. Number 8, you should never default to putting survivors on your nearest hook. In most situations, this is your best bet simply because it just saves time and has less risk of survivors body blocking to get a survivor off your shoulder, but you should not be doing this 100% of the time. Look around to see if there's a hook that could put the survivor in a worse position. The easiest and most obvious example of this is if the basement is nearby. If you're playing someone like Bubba or the Huntress, who are both extremely strong at playing around the basement, it's totally worth it to spend the extra time carrying the survivor down there. A less common example could be a hill spawning on the edge of the map with the entrance of the hill facing toward the outside of the map. If you spend the extra time to put them on this hook, that means that survivors not only have to go all the way around the hill to even attempt to save, but they also have to take fall stagger if they jump off the hill, so both of these situations can help you get free hits. Number 9, you should never slug without intention or information. You may have heard from a lot of content creators or other people that slugging is extremely strong and a very good strategy, and while yes, this is true, it's only true when you do it properly. And most people, especially newer killers, do not know how to do it properly. Slugging doesn't just mean downing people and never hooking them for no reason. There should always be a reason that you're slugging. For example, if you have information that a survivor is nearby and you're in a dead zone, then of course you should slug the survivor because you can easily down that other person before the slug makes any meaningful progress on the recovery bar. So now you have 2 downs in the same area, which means that the 2 other survivors on the team now have to stop doing their generators and come towards you. On the other hand, if you know that there's another nearby survivor, but they're near a really strong loop like Shack, it might not be worth slugging the first survivor because by the time you chase the survivor at Shack and down them, the survivor you downed probably got picked up already. This is another thing where you'll have to make good judgment calls and just requires you to have experience on when and when not to slug, but the general rule of thumb is if you think you can down someone or even get a hit before the other person can finish their recovery progress, then it's a good idea to slug in that situation. Number 10, never have an empty loadout. Unlike the United States, the Bloodpoint economy is thriving in DBD, so you are guaranteed to have add-ons. There's literally zero reason you should ever have an empty loadout because you gain add-ons more than you lose them. So even if they're add-ons that you think aren't very helpful, they still at least do something. So even if they're common rarity, just throw them on, who cares? Number 11, you should never pick up a survivor in the direction you were just looking unless it's facing a wall. This is a great tip to counter flashlight saves and will usually throw off anyone who is going for one. Because if you walk towards the survivor and just pick them up without turning your camera at all, it gives the flashlight user a lot more time to react to where you're gonna look. However, if you walk towards a survivor and then suddenly flip your camera 180 degrees and then pick the survivor up, it'll completely throw off the flashlight user's position and will likely prevent them from being able to flashlight save. And obviously this tip is for if the survivor is downed in the middle of nowhere, but if you're near a wall, just look at the wall before picking the survivor up. Number 12, you should almost never respect safe pallets. If you don't know, respecting pallets means stopping yourself before you get to a pallet to prevent yourself from being stunned. In like 99% of situations, if you're at a safe pallet like Shack, for example, it's generally better to just eat the stun rather than to risk the survivor getting another loop in, which would likely give them more time than your stun duration. For unsafe pallets, yes, you want to respect them because stunning is the only way that the survivor can get out of that situation. But for safe pallets, just eat the stun. It's really not that bad. Number 13, you should never take loops wide. This is pretty straightforward, but if you're taking loops wide, you're losing precious milliseconds you could have had to down the survivor. If you loop tighter, it could make the difference between downing a survivor or getting stunned by the pallet. This is just a blanket rule. There are pretty much no exceptions to this, so just never take loops wide. Number 14, you should never fully commit to chasing people until they go down in every single situation. A lot of newer killers will get tunnel visioned on chasing a survivor until they go down, but one of the most important skills you need to learn as killer is when to leave chase. This is another thing that requires you to have experience to know when to take advantage of this tactic, but here are some questions you can ask yourself that might help. Is there another survivor close by who may be in a worse position? Have you been chasing this survivor for more than a minute or so? Is this the strongest survivor on the team? Are you currently undetectable, so leaving the survivor you're chasing may throw other survivors off guard since they don't see your red stain or hear your tear radius? Is there another objective that you should be prioritizing that would put you in a more advantageous position than downing this survivor? If the answer to any of these is yes, then you should really consider leaving the chase, especially if you have information on a nearby survivor, so you're not just leaving the chase to go walk around the map and waste time. Number 15, you should almost never prioritize kicking gens over chasing a survivor. It's much better to injure or down a survivor than it is to regress a gen by a little bit. Unless you have a perk like Pop Goes the Weasel or some other regression perk that you think will be even more useful than downing a survivor, then by all means kick the gen, but in like 90% of situations, you're much better off just going straight past the gen to chase the survivor. Number 16, you should never ever loop the outside of TL walls. These structures with the 2 windows and the 2 walls are known as TL walls because one of them is in the shape of a T and the other one is in the shape of an L. By looping on the outside, you are giving the survivor plenty of time to make it back to the window for another loop. However, if you loop on the inside of a TL wall, it forces the survivor into a 50-50 where you either commit to that direction or you double back to hit them through the vault. Number 17, you should never vault TL walls. This might actually be worse than looping them on the outside. This locks you in a position for a short period of time, which guarantees that the survivor has enough time to get to the other window. Never ever do this. There's pretty much no exception to this rule unless you have bamboozle, but even then, it'll likely give survivors enough distance to make it to another loop entirely. Number 18, you should never underestimate the power of hitting survivors normally without your ability. Many killers will try so hard to use their power instead of just accepting that you're not in a good position to use your power. This happens a lot with killers such as Bubba or Billy because killers feel like they have to take advantage of their insta-down ability, but it's better to get an injure than to not down them at all. So if you think there's a high likelihood that your ability will miss or that you won't be able to get the down, just hit them instead. Number 19, you should never continue to do the same exact mind game games in Chase. This one's pretty straightforward. If you keep doing the same mind game, it's obviously going to become predictable, especially if the survivors are on comms and call out what you like to do. One of the first things that any of my friends says when the game starts and they're the first one being chased is whether or not the killer respects pallets. If they say that the killer hard respects pallets, and then the killer comes to chase me, I'm going to try to be a little bit more greedy with the pallets. And if the killer continues to respect pallets, then they're going to lose so much pressure that they could have had otherwise. Instead, constantly switch up what you're doing, constantly switch up your strategy. Number 20, you should never vault a window just by walking straight up to it and vaulting it. This is like the worst possible thing you could do at a window. If a survivor vaults a window in Chase, they'll be looking at you to see what you do. And if you're on a clear, straight path towards that window, it gives the survivor plenty of time to gain distance. However, if you're gonna vault the window, at least make it hard to tell that you're going to. Like if you pretend that you're gonna cut the survivor off, the survivor will obviously start going in the opposite direction. So if you moonwalk to the window to hide your red stain and then vault it, the survivor will have a lot less distance. Number 21, you should always keep track of the perks that the survivors are using, even if you think they may not be important. For example, if you notice that one of the survivors has self-care, and every single time you hit that person, they go to a corner of the map to self-care, you can easily take advantage of that by injuring the player and then leaving Chase. They're clearly scared of being injured, and you'll be wasting so much of the survivor's time because self-care takes so long that it'll give you a huge advantage. Number 22, you should never chase everyone equally. What I mean by this is you should always keep in mind and educate a guess on how good each survivor is. Here's why. Any survivor can easily work on gens no matter the skill level. So if you're chasing the best player on the team, your chase is going to take longer and the gens will be getting completed by the lower skilled players. However, if you chase the worst player on the team more often, your chases will be shorter, yet the gens will be getting completed at the exact same speed. So make sure you try to prioritize chasing the weak links on the team. Number 23, you should never start learning the killer role by playing unique killers. When I say unique killers, I'm referring to killers whose playstyles are completely different than your average killer. Examples of this would be Nurse, Singularity, Knight, Dracula, etc. Try to play killers who will help you learn the basics of playing any killer, such as Legion, Wraith, Huntress, Bubba, so on and so forth. Obviously, these killers have their own unique playstyles, but they still have the core fundamental gameplay of chasing survivors, whereas something like Nurse utilizes a completely different way of catching the survivors. Number 24, you should never loop pallets in the wrong direction. Always think through the direction you're looping a pallet in. Ideally, you want to loop the survivors so that when they throw the pallet, they're in the worst position possible. For example, if the pallet is on the outside of the map, make sure you loop in the direction so that the survivor will throw the pallet while they're on the side closest to the outer edge of the map. This will force the survivor to lose a ton of distance when you kick the pallet. Number 25, you should never not recognize strong loops. There are certain loops against certain killers that can be extremely time wasting, especially if they're connected to other loops. This also takes quite a bit of experience to recognize, but if you notice that a survivor is able to connect loops together almost seamlessly, and it seems like you're just not able to catch up to them ever, it may be worth it to just pretend like this is a safe zone for survivors that you can't enter. So if they start to go towards that area, just choose to pressure somewhere else. Ignoring players in these safe zones can lead you to winning a lot more games, but only when you do this properly. Number 26, you should never patrol gens that are difficult to get to. Let's take the generator at the top of the Dead Dog main building, for example. To get to this generator, you have to go all the way to the back of the main building to either go up the stairs inside or up the stairs on the outside, and then go all the way around to get to the gen, only for you just to drop down a second later. This wastes so much of your time for literally no reason. Just let the survivors complete that gen. It's not worth spending the time trying to protect it. Now we're on to the most important tips for you to learn. If this video has been helpful so far, drop a like and subscribe if you're new. Number 27, you should never ignore your gen locations. If gens are popping quickly, take note of the gens that you have left. If you notice that you have 3 generators within close proximity of each other, patrolling them should be your new priority, not camping or tunneling a survivor. This is known in the community as a 3-gen and is extremely advantageous for the killer, as survivors are now forced to come to your area rather than you coming to them. If you've ever played any competitive FPS games such as Valorant or CSGO or Rainbow Six Siege, this is a similar concept to planting the bomb as the attacker. When you plant the bomb, it suddenly turns the game from you attacking to you defending, which is so much easier. Keeping a 3-gen is a very similar concept. Survivors will exhaust all of their resources in that area and will start to be forced into bad positions that you can take advantage of. Number 28, if you're learning killer, never run Noed, Lightborn, or Franklin's. Now hear me out before you click off the video. I am not a survivor main that's just telling you to take off these perks because they're cringe and I don't like them or whatever they say. I am an exactly 50-50 player and I have good logic and reasoning for this tip. These 3 perks are considered crutch perks that limit your ability to learn and improve in certain areas. Think of them like training wheels on a bike. Training wheels are a great way to get started, but if you never take them off, you're never going to learn how to actually ride the bike. The same concept applies here. gear. Let's take Noed for example. If you have Noed on, you always know in the back of your mind that if you're not able to get downs quickly and the last gen pops, you have a great way to get pressure after that situation. But the issue with this is that it doesn't teach you how to get those downs quickly beforehand because you don't really need to. If you take it off, suddenly you're forced to learn how to actually play killer and keep up the pressure before the endgame happens, which will help you improve as a killer overall. Same thing with Franklin's and Lightborn. To be honest, most items are pretty bad nowadays anyway, so Franklin's isn't even really a good perk to begin with. But for Lightborn, if you never learn how to counter flashlights, you're never going to improve in that area and you'll always be down a perk slot. If you take off Lightborn, you're forced to learn how to counter flashlights, which really isn't that difficult once you have some experience, and then you have a free perk slot that you can use for something else. Long story short, if you take off your training wheels, you'll improve a lot faster and have room for a lot more useful perks. Number 29, you should never camp in tunnel in every situation. A lot of new killers tend to camp in tunnel if things aren't going their way, which is perfectly fine and is a totally valid strategy, but you shouldn't just resort to doing this in every single situation. There are good situations to camp and there are good situations to tunnel, but I also see a lot of newer killers camping and tunneling in situations that are terrible for these strategies. For example, if you're hardcore tunneling and that survivor has 3 anti-tunnel perks and they're somewhat decent in chase, you suddenly just lost 2 to 3 minutes of precious time that you could have been spending doing something else. If you camp someone early in the match, you're giving the survivors plenty of time to just complete the objective, heal each other, then get a free save on the hooked survivor. It's not benefiting you in any way. If you're a less experienced killer, try to not use these strategies. You may feel like you have to resort to these strategies in some of your matches, but step out of your comfort zone and try to not use them. You won't have the knowledge of how and when to tunnel or camp until you have a good macro sense of DBD, which takes hundreds, if not thousands of hours of experience to learn. Number 30, you should never get frustrated at toxicity in game. Trust me, I totally understand how annoying toxicity is, especially if you're having trouble actually downing the survivors. People teabagging or emoting at pallets or windows, quote unquote bully squads who bring head-on and flashlights, etc., are all things that can easily frustrate you, but if you actually think about it logically, every single toxic thing in this game that survivors do actually puts you at an advantage. Let's take teabagging after a pallet stun for example. The entire purpose of pallet stuns is to gain distance to make the killer take longer to catch you. And guess what happens when the survivor chooses to teabag after stunning you? They lose the distance that they could have been making. Or take head-on and flashlight players as another example. Sure, it may feel like you're getting stunned and blinded constantly, but what are the survivors supposed to be doing? The gens. And what are the survivors not doing if they're trying to go for flashlight saves or head-on stuns? That's right, the gens. Plus, survivors that try to go for head-on stuns and flashlight saves put themselves into super risky situations that you can easily take advantage of. Flashlight saves are so easy to counter just by looking at a wall when you pick up, and even if you literally pretend that the other survivor isn't there, it still means that you have one less person doing gens and more information for you. If you know that survivors are using head-on, it's very obvious when other survivors are trying to bait you in front of a locker, so just bait the head-on user instead and then hit them after they miss their head-on. Everything that you may consider toxic that survivors do in game gives you an advantage, so just take advantage of it. If anything, it's easier to win against a good toxic player than it is to win against a good normal player. Number 31, you should never only play killer. One of the best ways to improve as killer is to play survivor. Yes, this sounds counterintuitive, but I promise you it'll improve you at a significantly faster rate than only playing killer. You'll learn how survivors think, how they position themselves, and why they make certain decisions in certain situations. This is invaluable knowledge to have, and it's very difficult to obtain this info without actually playing survivor. So of course, main the role that you enjoy more, because after all, this is a video game, so play what you enjoy playing, but playing survivor is in my opinion the best way to improve at killer. And number 32, you should never just play the game. You should also be watching content creators. This is absolutely the most important tip, and I'm not just saying that because I am a content creator myself. I genuinely think that watching content creators is the absolute best way to improve as killer, because you will pick up on a ton of tips and tricks that you can use that you may have never even thought or considered in a million years. You'll notice certain mind games that they do or certain decisions that they make that will make you question what they just did and why, which means you're learning and improving in the back of your mind. I remember doing this when I was learning how to play DBD back in the day, and watching other content creators made me significantly better. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, come check out this one where I talk about the best killers that you should unlock, buy, or play first. A ton of people found this super helpful, so I definitely recommend checking it out.